stunning Lexus IS 300h. Now from €355 a month. With exclusive upgrades, saving you up to €3,000. The Lexus IS. Amazing in motion.
This is the famous Budweiser. Beechwood aged for a more refreshing taste. We like doing things our way, so you can enjoy it your way. This Bud's for you.
Collection. A choice of 3-layered temptations. Smooth, dark chocolate. A coconut-covered delight. And uniquely delicious Ferrero Rocher. Ferrero Collection. Give something special.
On the 9 o'clock news tonight, UN Climate Conference opens in Paris. 195 world leaders gather amid warnings and calls for immediate action.
We are the first generation to feel the impact of climate change and the last generation that can do something about it.
Belfast's High Court rules that abortion laws there are in breach of human rights. A year after the death of Jonathan Corrie, claims that things are worse for the homeless.
People think like homeless people are worthless. Well, that's the way I feel at the moment, that I'm worthless, that I'm nothing.
And a man is to be sentenced for having sex with a teenager after grooming her online. Good evening and welcome. The Taoiseach has promised to bring forward new laws in the current Dáil session to help tackle climate change. Mr Kenny was speaking at the UN summit in Paris, where it's hoped a deal can be reached on reducing carbon emissions. US President Barack Obama urged world leaders to adopt a common purpose for a world that is marked not by conflict but by cooperation. Our environment correspondent George Lee is in Paris tonight and joins us now. George?
Yes, Eileen, this day has been a long, long time coming. It is 22 years since these COP negotiations started back in the 1990s, and all of the time the governments have been leading towards trying to get a solution and trying to get a total agreement in relation to climate change. So the preparations have been meticulous. They failed 5 years ago. The French have put in huge effort. Security was really, really high. And I think when we came to this morning, you could see that the impact of all of those preparations were beginning to pay off.
One heart, one tree. That was the project that lit up the Eiffel Tower last night with messages so clear. No words were required. There were no words here either, as President Barack Obama went straight from his touchdown in the small hours to lay a single white rose in tribute to those who died at the Bataclan Theatre. And there were no words here either, as a minute's silence was observed for the victims of Paris's terrorist attacks. But 147 global leaders could not be kept silent. Never ever before have so many of them been assembled in the one place at the one time. A lot of talking needs to be done to tackle climate change.
For I believe, in the words of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., that there is such a thing as being too late. And when it comes to climate change, that hour is almost upon us. But if we act here, if we act now, if we place our own short-term interests behind the air that our young people will breathe and the food that they will eat and the water that they will drink and the hopes and dreams that sustain their lives, then we won't be too late for them.
And as if to underscore the importance of the talks, China today choked in smog. Airborne particles were 25 times the safe level, and poor visibility grounded flights. In Paris, the executive secretary of the talks told negotiators the world is waiting for a solution.
Never before has a responsibility so great been in the hands of so few.
The Taoiseach said Ireland wants to and will participate in achieving climate goals that are fair and sustainable.
I hope that we are serious about putting in place a legally binding agreement on climate change that will underpin our actions on the goals already agreed and enhance our ability to reach those goals.
Elsewhere, however, he said that Ireland wants an understanding. We will need some space to deliver on our commitments until our economy has recovered.
We have lost a decade of investment in our country because of what happened, and that cannot be recovered. And until we have an economic engine to enable us to change structures and to continue to invest in research and innovation for more sustainable ways of doing agriculture, that presents us with a challenge.
The Taoiseach rejected the suggestion that this meant that Ireland wanted to tell the poorest countries in the world that we are not rich enough to tackle climate change.
Now, George, listening to the various world leaders today, there does seem to be a determination to get an agreement at this conference.
Well, there certainly does sound like there is, Eileen, and if big words could deliver a cure for climate change, it would have been solved here today. Everybody came with very inspiring speeches and very determined words that were delivered. The speeches went on longer than they should have done, but messages, whether they were for home or international audiences, they were certainly delivered. The problem is, of course, the leaders have come at the beginning of the negotiations this time, so they're able to say such positive things. It's at the end of the negotiations that the whole issue will be decided about whether or not we have got there. They've been given the imprimatur, and they've given that imprimatur to the negotiators now to get on with it, but it is difficult. You just heard the Taoiseach there talk about Ireland wanted a legally binding agreement. The Americans and so many others don't want legally binding agreements. Who pays? When do they pay? Who gets a free ride? All of those things have to be decided. So words are not going to be enough to get this deal across the line. 2 weeks of hard-fought negotiations are ahead of us now.
Well, as you say, we heard the Taoiseach and he's talking in one voice for the global audience, but yet he is looking for a different kind of agreement, and many other countries in the same boat.
Yes, and I think that goes to the heart of it. The will is there in terms of, and the desire to get an agreement, but everybody has a view and a special case to argue. And in Ireland's case, the case which we have is all related to agriculture and related to the fact the kind of investments we require, if we're going to keep the economy together with the vision that the government has, requires a healthy economy, one where the government has money to invest, and they do not have that at the moment. The argument which he makes is that Ireland was given really, really crazy targets the last time the negotiations happened in Europe to get our carbon emissions down by 20%. We're not going to do it really effectively, is what he's saying. And if we're to build in that and then pile on more on top of that, we won't achieve it. He said, why aim for targets that you're not going to achieve? So he wants understanding in relation to Ireland's position, that people will realise that in time we will get there, but we need a little bit of wriggle room, a bit of elbow room. And the problem is, for many people, that sounds like special pleading. And I think that will go down pretty poorly with people in the poorest country of the world.
Okay, George Lee in Paris. Thank you for that. Staying with the climate change talks, the United States is the second biggest emissions contributor after China, but it's also home to the region most at risk from climate change factors like coastal erosion and rising sea levels. Our Washington correspondent Katrina Perry has been to South Louisiana to see the impact of climate change there.
The mighty Mississippi River flowing through New Orleans into the Gulf of Mexico, an important port city. Nearly half of America's seafood comes from here. The state is the primary source of the country's crude oil, plus its unique ecosystem. It's a critical stop-off location for migratory birds. However, its future is far from secure.
Louisiana has the fastest rate of coastal erosion and rising sea levels in the world. And as marshlands like these continue to break up, the state loses around a soccer pitch size of land every hour.
The impact of this is dramatic, according to this fisherman who swapped his shrimping boat for the seawall today.
From the erosion standpoint, things look completely different. When you go out there 6 months or a year, especially after a hurricane, you have to reorient yourself with a place that you've gone for 20 years. Bays get much bigger in a short period of time, and bayous turn into bays in no time flat. And it creates some good fishing opportunities still, but it's obviously a concern, being that we have a lot of people that make a livelihood off of the seafood industry.
To protect itself, the city has adopted a two-strand approach, diverting the river flow where it can and pumping sediment back onto its shoreline to try to rebuild that natural marsh barrier, and building the Great Wall of New Orleans, 500 miles of flood barriers and surge gates, the world's largest, to protect against rising waters.
Well, we're losing this natural buffer. The land, the marsh has degraded, it's sunk, it's subsided. Then we get the eustatic sea level rise, and it's a deadly combination. So while we have the biggest, strongest hurricane protection system this city has ever seen, we need to restore that natural ecosystem buffer that will protect the protection system.
This pumping station is built on what was a boardwalk restaurant district swept away by Hurricane Katrina.
They're responsible for pulling the water out of the canal and then pumping it around the structure. That is what we're designed to do here, is to remove an Olympic-sized swimming pool every 3 seconds.
With an eroding coastline, rising seawaters and ever more frequent and powerful hurricanes, southern Louisiana is the part of the US most feeling the effects of climate change. Katrina Perry, RTE News, New Orleans.
A legal challenge to Northern Ireland's strict abortion laws has been successful. The Belfast High Court has ruled that women should be allowed to have a termination of their pregnancy in cases of rape, incest or fatal fetal abnormality. Northern Ireland's Attorney General is expected to appeal the decision.
Northern Ireland has the UK's most restrictive abortion provisions. The NHS provides an abortion service here only when a woman's life is at risk, or if there's a serious risk to her physical or mental health. The Belfast-based Human Rights Commission lodged a legal challenge in the High Court last June. Sarah Ewart publicly backed that campaign. According to her, in 2013, she went to England for an abortion after being told the baby she was carrying had no chance of survival. Today, Mr. Justice Horner ruled abortion should be available in cases of fatal fetal abnormality and in cases of incest and rape. He rejected the Human Rights Commission argument that it should also apply in cases of fetal malformation. Nevertheless, it is a landmark decision and produced different reactions.
That's, I think, a historic judgment. It's a very important day that the judge has recognised the issue of human rights. The judge has also found that there is no general right to abortion, and that's something the Commission has always accepted.
Yes, these women are victims, but we can't make a victim out of an unborn child by destroying that unborn child's life. We must provide care and support for those women. Destroying an unborn child in these circumstances is still wrong. It doesn't make it right because of the circumstances of the child's conception.
Among those in court was the mother of Sarah Ewart.
I'm so glad actually that the judge heard her story and took note of it and has judged the right way to help women like Sarah.
Northern Ireland's Attorney General John Larkin said he was profoundly disappointed by the High Court decision. He is expected to lodge an appeal.
And Tommy joins us now from Belfast. Tommy, how would that appeal process work?
Well, the last available stage here would be the Court of Appeal. That's within Northern Ireland. After that, within the overall UK system, there's the Supreme Court based in London, where the matters of major public importance are teased out. You could see, if all the players here were agreeable to it, you could see them skip the Court of Appeal stage and go straight to the Supreme Court in London.
Now, of course, it's a very sensitive issue, particularly for the politicians.
It certainly is, and remember, the UK doesn't have a constitution as such, but take what's going on here in Northern Ireland. You have devolved government, and the different parties here are only working out how the system works. The rules are being, I suppose, made up and worked out as they go along. And when you come to a major moral question like this, people are trying to work out the balance between their own conscience, between the influence of their voters, taking religious matters into account as well. And bear in mind as well the different parties you have at Stormont and their different traditions. So in a situation like this, The parties are also trying to work out how they interact with the judiciary. And I'd say, Eileen, it's a fair calculation to make at this stage that it's unlikely this matter will be finally decided this side of Assembly elections next May. I can see this decision under consideration for several more months.
Okay, Tom, leave it there. Thank you for that. And there we take a break, but still to come on the 9 o'clock news. British Labour MPs are to be allowed a free vote on airstrikes in Syria. And thousands attend a public memorial for New Zealand's Jonah Lomu.
I sit down by the window and stare. The blind is shut, but I don't care. I'm going up, I'm going down. I'm going nuts when you're not around.
Peugeot 2008. See the road in a different light with 2.9% APR finance and a cool €750 customer reward during Peugeot Sensation Days. Now on.
Earlier this week, my husband was in pain and could barely move. But not tonight.
He's been using Voltarol gel. Unlike products that work by only heating or cooling the skin, Voltarol contains an anti-inflammatory which provides a triple effect by relieving pain at source and reducing inflammation, which helps speed up recovery. Voltarol, the joy of movement.
This is the famous Budweiser. Beechwood aged for a more refreshing taste. We like doing things our way, so you can enjoy it your way. This Bud's for you.
The choice of 3 layered temptations. Smooth, dark chocolate, a coconut-covered delight, and uniquely delicious Ferrero Rocher. Ferrero Collection. Give something special.
Welcome back. A Dublin man is to be sentenced for having sex with an underage girl after grooming her online. 26-year-old Conor O'Keefe from Oakdale Close, Ballycullen, set up a fake social media profile where he befriended the 15-year-old girl. He'll be sentenced in January.
Conor O'Keefe leaving court this afternoon. It heard he set up a profile in the name of a 13-year-old girl, Julie Kay, on a website where children meet. He then friended the 15-year-old victim, who thought the 13-year-old girl looked nice. O'Keefe, pretending to be Julie on the tagged.com website, then told the victim about a 22-year-old brother who had a car and wanted to meet her. The child couldn't sleep one night and went online to O'Keefe at 3:30 in the morning on the 30th of July 2011. She gave him her number, he rang her from a blocked phone and directed her into a taxi, giving her instructions and directions as she travelled. He paid €45 to the taxi driver when she arrived and took her to his bedroom. The court was told today that Conor O'Keefe gave the 15-year-old girl 3 options for sex with him, but that when she said no to some and don't know to others, he became annoyed and told her she had to say yes to one. The child then agreed to have sex with him, after which he fell asleep. When he woke up at 8:15 in the morning, he drove her home, but the child was troubled. She first spoke to her auntie, then to her mother, and the Gardaí were called in. The girl described where the house was, and Garda Lisa Duffy told the court that when Gardaí arrived at O'Keefe's home, he accepted he was the person they were looking for. He pleaded guilty to defilement, but contested the charge of sexual exploitation, grooming, but was convicted by a jury. Conor O'Keefe's defence counsel today described it as a once-off incident and said he was now in a new relationship. His baby son was born yesterday. He has no previous convictions and has complied with all Garda, probation and registered sex offender requirements. Judge Sarah Berkeley described it as a very difficult case involving complicated matters and said she will sentence O'Keefe in January. Paul Reynolds, RTE News, the Dublin Circuit Criminal Court.
The head of Dublin, Simon, has said the homeless situation has deteriorated in the past year and is going to get worse. Sam McGuinness said it was clear not enough had been done to end homelessness since Jonathan Corry died.
This is the doorway where on this night last year, Jonathan Corry laid down to sleep for a final time. The next morning his body was discovered. His death sparked calls for change, candlelit vigils and a homeless summit with a commitment that anyone who wanted a bed for the night in Dublin could have access to one. Tonight a plaque is in place and some flowers have been laid in his memory, but a year on people continue to sleep rough, including Dean, who's been homeless on and off since 2009. In the cold, he and his friends have to stay close.
It is hard that three men with this weather coming in actually hugging each other, going to sleep at night to keep warm.
Last winter, 168 people were sleeping rough. By spring, it was down to 105. The number this winter is due shortly. Some 5,000 people are in emergency accommodation. Lisa and Shane have been assessed for a couple's place, but are still homeless.
Our peers and things at home happened, so that's why we were here. And we used to stay in the hostels, but then there was an awful lot of trouble and drugs and no drinking, and we don't like fighting, so we tried to stay away from all that, so we just stay on our own.
It's gotten much worse, and it's going to get worse. It's going to continue to get worse. The real issue is housing, the shortage of housing. Homeless people are complex, but we're all complex. But if people could get one accommodation and be able to move in there and get security and get an opportunity for self-worth and be able to get employment and stabilise themselves, it's the biggest difference it can make to anybody.
The Department of Environment say 250 emergency spaces put in place last year are still in place, and there are an extra 175 beds for this winter. The Night Cafe continues to open. They've also introduced a 2-year freeze on rents and have promised 500 modular housing units and 35,000 social housing units over 6 years. As for Dean,
people think like homeless people are worthless. Well, that's the way I feel at the moment, that I'm worthless, that I'm nothing. Now, when I am, I deserve a right to live, not just exist. So that's all I'm doing now at the moment, is existing.
a protest is due to take place in Dublin tomorrow on this issue. All the homeless services are joining together to call on the government to take urgent action. Helen Donoghue, RTE News.
The Minister for Justice, Francis Fitzgerald, will bring a bill to Cabinet tomorrow to reduce the bankruptcy period from 3 years to 1 year. The bill will also increase the penalties for those who try to hide their assets. Our political correspondent, Martina Fitzgerald, has more details. Martina, this bill had been expected.
That's right. If you rewind back to March, Labour's Willie Penrose had announced on the fringes of the Labour conference that he wanted to publish a bill to reduce the bankruptcy period from 3 years to 1. Then it went into the Justice Committee, and then it went to the Department of Justice. We're told that there are some changes, but due tomorrow in the Cabinet meeting, and Francis Fitzgerald is going to bring forward a bill to reduce it from 3 years to 1. There are also other measures. For instance, for those who are currently in the bankruptcy process, the bankruptcy period will be 18 months. Also, in serious cases of non-cooperation, this will result in a person's bankruptcy period being extended to 15 years. The maximum penalty at present is 8 years. And also, under the current system, someone may have to make payments for up to 5 years after the bankruptcy period expires. This will be reduced to 3 years in most cases where there's full cooperation, and there are other changes as well. Now, it's understood the Department of Justice is looking at dealing with any impact this would have on the court system, because there are some 600 existing bankruptcy cases.
Okay, Martina, thank you. The cost of using public transport for some commuters will increase from tomorrow. Cash fares for many Dublin Bus, Luas, Irish Rail and Bus Éireann services will be hit. The National Transport Authority said the changes were approved in order to encourage people to switch to using the cheaper option of a loop card. In Britain, David Cameron says he will call a one-day Commons debate and vote on Wednesday over airstrikes in Syria. The Labour Party leader Jeremy Corbyn has decided to grant MPs a free vote on the issue. However, he has said he will make it clear that Labour Party policy is to oppose airstrikes.
Sorry, would you mind the way, please, so I can get in the car?
The day started badly.
It's pretty much very rude the way you behave.
And just got worse. By afternoon, Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn had made the decision to allow party MPs a free vote on airstrikes against the so-called Islamic State in Syria. The depth of the party divisions on such a pivotal subject clear for all to see.
I actually have more in common with the Tory chair of the Defence Select Committee today than I may do with some of my Labour colleagues. But I do think that these things do cross party boundaries, and I think that that's fair enough.
Jeremy Corbyn opposes bombing but says the party will not officially take that stance. Among his supporters, an understanding of the dilemma in which he found himself.
I mean, I would agree with Corbyn's views on military intervention. It wouldn't be my first option. I think there are other options that need to be explored. However, as leader, he does have a responsibility to members to be able to take their views.
I don't think it's Corbyn backing down. I mean, he's obviously going to vote against airstrikes. I think issues of war and peace are too serious to, force MPs to vote one way or the other.
Tonight, David Cameron has announced he will have a day's debate on the issue in the House of Commons on Wednesday, amid what he calls growing support for his view that airstrikes are the right strategy to pursue. Fiona Mitchell, RTE News, London.
Pope Francis has visited a mosque in the capital of the Central African Republic, where he told worshippers that Christians and Muslims were brothers and sisters. The Pope also celebrated Mass at a stadium in Bangui on the last day of his three-nation African visit.
Amid tight security, Pope Francis entered the PK5 district of Bangui, where thousands of Muslims fleeing violence have sought refuge. People here are currently cut off from the rest of the city, surrounded by armed Christian militias. This resident says he's very happy the Pope has come. People say the PK5 is an area full of criminals, he says, but in fact there's no danger here. At the Grand Mosque of Kuduku, Imam Nehedi Tijani told the Pope that people understood the symbolic importance of his visit. Pope Francis said that Christians and Muslims were brothers and sisters. Together we must say no to hatred, no to revenge, and no to violence, he said, particularly that violence which is perpetrated in the name of a religion or of God himself, he said. God is peace, God salam. Thousands of people have died and hundreds of thousands have been displaced since violence escalated in the Central African Republic 3 years ago. At Bangui's 20,000-seater Barthélemy Stadium, Pope Francis celebrated Mass in front of a cheering crowd. This woman says she thinks the country will begin to get sorted out thanks to the arrival of the Pope. Pope Francis has also been to Kenya and Uganda as part of his first visit to Africa. The Pope left Bangui earlier today to return to Rome. Sinead Morris, RTE News.
Thousands of people gathered in Auckland for a public memorial for former New Zealand rugby player Jonah Lomu. The 40-year-old, who had a rare kidney condition, died earlier this month after returning from a trip to the World Cup.
A fitting venue for a final farewell. Jonah Lomu's life on and off the field was honoured at the iconic Eden Park Stadium. His casket was carried by former teammates. Wife Nadine kissed a family photo alongside their two young children. Former All Blacks coach and family spokesman John Hart gave an emotional farewell to Lomu.
You were many things to many people. You were a freak on the field and a gentle, caring giant off it. A loving husband, dad, son, and brother. But most of all, you were a lovely, lovely man. Officially, we salute All Black number 941. But to the world, you will be known as the All Black who made number 11 his own. Rest in peace, my friend.
A final private funeral service will take place later in the week. Dave Kelly, RTE News.
And the main news once again. The Taoiseach has promised to bring forward new laws in the current Dáil session to help tackle climate change. Mr Kenny was speaking at the UN summit in Paris, where it's hoped a deal can be reached on reducing carbon emissions. You can keep up to date with developments on the RTE News Now channel and the News Now app. But that's Monday's 9 o'clock news. Primetime Investigates follows, and the next bulletin is on News Now at 11. But for the moment, from the newsroom, a very good evening.
White or black, serious or smiley, turkey or goose. At Carphone Warehouse, we live to compare. 2 or 3, in store or online. So only we can give you impartial advice across the network's phones and offers. For the greatest choice this Christmas, see Carphone Warehouse. We compare, you save.
You're a giant, a juggler, a lifeguard, a smoother, a supporter. What a spoiled sport. Who was it said you can't be all things to all people?
Toyota, the best built cars in the world.
Good evening. Well, overall our weather remains very unsettled for the rest of the week and well into next weekend as well. Very changeable weather from day to day. There'll be some dry spells now and again, particularly inland tomorrow and again on Wednesday, but rain at times also. And it will be very windy now and again, especially over the next 24 hours and again at the end of the week. There's a risk of very strong winds through Friday and Friday night. And at the moment we have wet and windy weather moving up across the country as this warm front makes its way northeastwards, bringing southwesterly gales to Atlantic coasts, some heavy rain, especially across the west and the north. So Tuesday is going to get off to a fairly wet start, particularly across Connacht, North Connacht and Ulster, but it will dry out in many areas during the day. Now, some places will remain rather damp and misty, particularly their Atlantic coastal areas. We may even see a few bright spells, though, through the Midlands, east and south, and it's going to be very mild. Now, tomorrow night we'll have more widespread rain once again as a cold front moves across the country with south to southwest gales in sea areas. But then on Wednesday it will improve, it'll brighten up with sunny spells developing and just a few scattered showers. But there's more rain on the way for Wednesday night. Now, still some uncertainty about Thursday's weather, but it looks as if there is a danger of some potentially very heavy rain across parts of the south and the east, though parts of the west and northwest are probably escaping. And then Friday is looking very windy with a risk of Gales, strong gales, possibly even storm force winds in sea areas. A lot of dry weather for a while, though damp and misty along Atlantic coasts. And overnight, a lot of cloud will move in across the country. It's going to bring rain eventually to all parts. At the moment, it's mostly in the south, but it will be moving gradually northwards. Though later on in the night, we'll have some dry weather developing further south. Quite chilly early on in parts of the north. There may even be a touch of frost here, but milder conditions will move up to all places by morning in that strengthening southwesterly wind. Gales developing off southwestern and western coasts, eventually spreading to the north coast by early tomorrow. So tomorrow, wet start to the day for some places, particularly parts of the north and northwest. But during the day, it'll dry out in many inland areas, with perhaps even a few bright spells, but will stay damp and misty in some areas, especially along parts of the Atlantic coasts. The temperatures tomorrow, 12 to 14 degrees, so very mild, but a windy day with strong and gusty southerly or southwesterly winds. Going more south to southwest tomorrow night with rain moving in across the country, but it will gradually brighten up from the west during Wednesday, and most areas will become dry. There'll be one or two scattered showers, and it will turn quite cold. That's it from me. Good evening.